One of the most remarkable aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is its unique history. Throughout the world, great stories from faithful church members have only added to that history. This program shares some of these incredible stories of faith, perseverance, hope, and inspiration. You're listening to Legacy. I'm your host, Nathan Wright. The American frontier was not a stagnant commodity to be surrounded and conquered. It was moving and elusive to all but those willing to keep pace with its retreat. For 3 centuries, it backed away from being tamed and constricted. This bold American frontier became the backdrop for the life stories of innumerable pioneers, frontiersmen, and settlers, most of whom have been lost to the shadows of history. Today on Legacy, we'll be talking about these rank-and-file pioneers, those not found in the history books and documentaries. And here to discuss this subject, and one pioneer in particular, is writer and historian Ronald Barney. Listeners of Legacy will recognize Ron as a previous guest when we discussed the Joseph Smith visit to Washington, D.C. Ron, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Before we jump into this discussion, please tell us a little more about yourself.
Well, I've been working with the Church History Department since 1977. I have history degrees from Weber State and Utah State University. I'm presently a series editor and a volume editor on the Joseph Smith papers, in which I've been involved for the last decade or so. I served for a number of years as senior archivist for the church archives, and am presently kind of closing down my career with the Joseph Smith papers.
Very good. Very fascinating. So the thing that brings us here today is a discussion about the rank and file of those in history. I'm not sure, but do you have an opinion about the human fascination with the celebrated or famous among us?
I suppose it's something that has been a part of the human experience as far back as we know anything, that there are individuals who, through whatever circumstances, end up having much higher profiles than most of the people. And it's these individuals end up being celebrated. I suppose we could debate the idea of what and who should be celebrated. But we have, at least in our lifetimes, had not just famous people, but celebrities. And I think our culture is prone to be preoccupied, to use your word, with those who are have some unique thing about them that makes them different in many ways from most of the rest of us. It's certainly true in our the pop culture of our American heritage. We've always been fascinated by presidents of the United States, and understandably so. But now we have individuals who are more famous than even presidents or political figures, who are in the world of entertainment and the world of sports. And I wouldn't say anything to denigrate that, but I would say that being preoccupied with it at the expense of everything else dilutes the power of the full scope of our heritage, of I think the potential of human beings to work together to try to make this a better world. When celebrities from the pop culture weigh in on things that have such an enormous impact on our lives, such as politics, and our views are swayed by really ignorant people, but famous people. And some of them may not be so ignorant. Some of them may be actually very well informed, but they get our attention perhaps in an undue and unwarranted way. And I don't denigrate the idea that that people are paying attention to them, but it is at the expense of so much that exists outside of their sphere that is profitable, beneficial, even may be more substantive. And we have fallen for this hook, line, and sinker.
Very good. Thank you for answering that question. Getting back to times previous, people like Brigham Young and Jim Bridger, Wilford Woodruff, names we all know and associate with American frontier and the Mormon migration. But as with any event in history, there are so many names that we don't know who helped shape the West and blaze the trail for others to follow. And the reason we're here today is because of a book you've written called One Side by Himself, The Life and Times of Lewis Barney. I think I'm fairly safe in saying that very few of our listeners have probably ever heard of Lewis Barney, and that's pretty much the point. Is it a coincidence that you and Lewis share the same surname?
No, he is my great-great-grandfather, whom I knew nothing about other than to know a name when I was growing up. But he came on the scene, and while he's primarily important to me and my family, he represents a mostly, I was going to use the word misunderstood, and I suppose there's a part of that, but a mostly ignored group of people. We're very familiar with the impact of several families upon the early foundation of this church. The Smiths, the Whitmers, the Youngs, the Cannons, the Snows, those are famous families, and they have been written about at length. We still have people who are interested in weighing in on these significant figures, and I wouldn't detract from their contribution to the restored gospel for a moment. But early Mormonism was primarily a collection of families, and it wasn't just these that are famous. The Knight family, who have received a little bit of attention. The Johnson families, and there's two major Johnson families, the Hancocks, the Tibbets. These families, which are mostly unknown in the church. At the outset, you would have a senior patriarch and his matriarch wife, most of them born in the 18th century, who embraced the gospel early on, and with their sizable offspring, the numbers of their sizable offspring, who were generally beginning families of their own. By the time that the church was 10 years old, these people had made a significant impact on the church. They manned the missionary posts. They filled the roles of quorum leadership. They were the ones who, in many ways, were at the very forefront of the revelatory commands received by church leaders to go and do. These were the men who left their women to go and do what was asked. And there are huge numbers of these people who are mostly unknown. Their life experience, proportionally to us, to the rank and file today, are probably not all that much different. Technology certainly separates us. The scale of living separates us. But beyond that, these people in many ways live their lives vis-a-vis the church not unlike we do. It is from this group of rank and file today that our bishops serve, our missionaries serve, our stake presidents serve. These are the people who carry out the teachings that our leaders receive regarding the advance of the kingdom of God upon the earth. And to ignore them is to ignore an enormous body of information. We literally have thousands of personal records in the church archives from individuals who wrote about their experience. And these are not the real high-profile folks, to be sure. But they have something to say that at least I can relate to. Their disappointments, the way that they were able to overcome their individual burdens, burdens that all of us have to one degree or another, is encouraging to me. I love to read about somebody whom I know made some mistakes and ended up standing up straight, because it gives me hope. And I know that it gives others hope. So this body of individuals who have received perhaps an attention level that is disproportionate to their numbers is something that it would be in our best interests to pay attention to.
Good, thank you. This is Legacy on the Mormon Channel. Today we're visiting with Ronald Barney, and we're talking about specifically one of his ancestors, Louis Barney. You said that there are two words that pretty well defined what Louis Barney was all about. One was Mormonism, or being a Mormon, and the other one was the frontier. When I think of the Mormon migration west, it seems they were forced into the frontier, a forced migration. How do you view the Mormon migration in this light compared to the, say, overall westward expansion?
Let me answer that in this way, which goes back a little bit preceding the Mormon migration. Not unlike so many others, Louis Barney's ancestors, his first Barney ancestor, a man by the name of Jacob Barney, came to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630 from England. Massachusetts Bay in 1630 was the frontier. And if we use the word frontier as many have used it in the past, that is the kind of the buffer between civilization and the wilderness, Louis Barney's family was a frontier for nearly 3 centuries, and they continually moved to the west. First in Massachusetts, and then Connecticut, and then in Vermont, where Louis Barney's father was born in 1783. His father, Charles Barney, moved westward, really quite a long ways, to western New York, just a few miles outside of Buffalo, New York, at the turn of the 19th century, where Louis Barney was born, coincidentally 202 years ago tomorrow.
Oh, well.
And it also gives some perspective as to the durability of many of these people in our minds. From there, they moved in 1811 to the center part of Ohio, and spent most of the next decade in Ohio in several different places before a significant move to Illinois in 1825. There for 14 years on the Illinois frontier, not too far outside of Springfield, Illinois, there in the Sangamon River area. They lived as far northeast of Springfield during the same period that Abraham Lincoln lived as far northwest outside of Springfield. They were contemporaries. the experiences that Abraham Lincoln had on the western frontier, including that of his family's attachment to predestinarian Baptist religion, was shared by the Barney family. Then in 1839, the Barneys moved into the state of Iowa, which was opening up for settlement. And it was there in 1840 that Mormon missionaries had an impact upon Lewis Barney personally. His older brother had embraced the faith a couple of years earlier, but Lewis Barney was entirely detached from religion, had little appreciation for anything that had been organized in the name of Christianity. He was disappointed because the things that he viewed from the biblical record did not show up, he said, in the manifestations of religion that he saw around him. But that all changed in 1840 when, in the spring of 1840, there in eastern Iowa, he became a Latter-day Saint. From there, he moved into Illinois, and as he was wont, he didn't settle in Nauvoo per se. He said that city life was not the way that he did business. He moved outside of Nauvoo, and indeed 3 miles north of Carthage, Illinois, where he established a farm, and shared many of the same experiences as the Latter-day Saints, eventually being run out of his home area when things became pretty rough for the Mormons in 1845, moved into Nauvoo in 1845, and then with the rest of the saints who received their endowments in the winter of 45-46, prepared himself, and then in the initial migration from Nauvoo in February of 1846, as he described it, he volunteered to transport poor people in that first part of the emigration, which included roughly 2,000 to 3,000 people who left in the dead of winter and began their very difficult slog across Iowa. They did not get to the Missouri River, which was their destination, until the first part of June. So from February till June of 1846, they were on the road, going along through a very, very difficult hardships of mud. Lewis Barney and others on the route described encounters with rattlesnakes that afflicted their horses, as storms that were unbelievable, that literally blew every tent down, every wagon cover off. I think the date was April 6th. It was just horrific, the circumstances they found themselves in. And then that first group who got to Iowa in June of 1846 was followed by the major part of the Latter-day Saints, roughly 10,000 people, who left shortly after the final dedication of the Nauvoo Temple in May of 1846, and began their trek across Iowa. Much better weather. There were trails that were established by this time, and it was an easier traverse of the landscape. And then the tail end of the Mormons were finally driven out in something that's been called the Battle of Nauvoo in September of 1846. One of my colleagues, I think, has very wisely described it as a horse, that you can kind of understand the Mormon migration by visualizing a horse. The horse's head represented that first group who left in February of 1846. The larger portion of the body left in the spring of 1846, and then finally the tail of the horse were expelled from Nauvoo in September of that year. And Bill Hartley, who is one of the great experts on the Mormon trail and the Mormon migration, was the one who coined that perception, which I think is very accurate.
I have a grandmother who was part of the tale there, Jane Johnston Black, who left with that last group. It seems that your grandfather's introduction and conversion to the gospel was very similar to the famous families that you mentioned earlier on in the church. And it just seems, had it been any other families, it probably would have been the very same circumstances. These families would have been the ones who would have gone early, would have become the leaders, etc. And I'm not sure that it would have mattered which families they were.
I think that's right. One of the reasons that I wrote the book was to be at once both representative of this larger scope of the Mormon experience and also to point out the individual circumstance of Louis Barney that I think adds to the texture and to the scope of Mormonism in a way that shows that would show and indicate that there is not a stereotypical Mormon. They came from a broad variation of human experience. He happened to be one who truly lived on the frontier. And he was that way once he got to Utah. He never lived in a place, even today, for the most part, the places that he eventually found himself are what we would call remote. It was a part of his disposition to live a hardy life, and I'm not saying that in a way that to make him sound like he was hardier than many others, but he chose to have things that were in a much rawer form than the polish that we normally associate with urban living. Something that he could have done, but chose not to. As I said before, there were numerous families of this sort who came to Utah. Many of them settled together. Louis Barney and his family, after they eventually settled in a permanent way in Utah, stayed together for quite a while before they began to separate and go their separate ways, not unlike the course that many others followed who joined the church and came to fill in the eastern sector of the Great Basin.
So you talked about his preference for living on the edge, the frontier, so to speak. Did he have a penchant for danger, or just didn't like living near other people? How did that?
Early on, the family had this disposition to move to the west, to start all over and over again. I begin the book with a statement written by a minister on the Missouri frontier in the early 1830s, writing back to his missionary conference secretary in the East, who described people who lived on the edge of the frontier as living one side by themselves. That is, there was always half of them that was that looked to the open spaces, to new opportunities. And then the other half, of course, would experience the trappings of civilization, growth, home building, communities. But once those communities built, these people picked up and moved westward. And Louis Barney and his family were no exceptions to this pattern. Percentage-wise, I don't know what they represented, but very clearly there is a body of people who kept doing that. And while I think his instincts were for what I've chosen to identify as a freedom and independence that urban and more organized society sort of precludes, I think that he could best be described as one who wanted to do things on his own terms. And when he found something stifling, or the adventure was over, or he had heard about opportunities somewhere else, he would take advantage of those circumstances. And he lived in a time before the frontier was closed, which is sort of a misnomer, but roughly about the decade before the beginning of the 20th century. He was able to do that, to literally pick up and start all over again. And he did it over and over.
There's an excerpt here in the introduction of your book that I would like to read, if I may. Far from being a place of limitations, the frontier had instead unusually abundant, unexploited natural resources, providing an exceptional opportunity for social and economic betterment to those who followed its siren call. And while there were many on the frontier who found social and economic betterment elusive, tens of thousands gambled with that hope. Like locusts, they swarmed always to the west, summarized Walter Prescott Webb, and only the Pacific Ocean stopped them. So it sounds like he wasn't alone in his desire to always find something new and always looking for something better.
I think it's hard for people today to understand that feeling. It's because it's mostly impossible today. There's still a few out there, some that we would call mavericks, who buck the system, and some of them are innovators. I think entrepreneurs have a little bit of that spirit within them, but to literally pick up and start all over again, time and time again, is something that's mostly unknown to us today. I know myself personally, I can't even imagine it. I can't imagine the physical hardship with associated with that kind of movement. And yet Louis Barney was doing this into his 80s. He was building a new home in his 70s down in Sevier County, putting up the logs, putting on the shingles, the trim of his house. He had a heart attack while he was doing it, and yet continued to do it, and didn't stop there. He ended up over in another sector of Sevier County later on. He moved to Luna Valley, New Mexico. Yet later on, from there to Bowie Station, Arizona, and that didn't conclude his life. He came back to Utah after disappointment there in those remote stretches of the West, and tried in his very elderly years to make something of himself and his family, even at that time, in circumstances that would boggle somebody like me today.
You had some material to draw from for this. Your great-great-grandfather actually kept pretty good records. How did that come about? Well,
he early on he did not, but in 1878, at the age of 70, he sat down at what I imagine was a fairly crude table in his log home in Monroe, Utah, and began to write an autobiography.
So it happened much later.
Much later. It was reminiscent, but the detail is so corroborative by other kinds of records. It makes me wonder if there was something that had been kept through the years that the autobiography was derivative of, but I can't say that for certain. The first attempt at writing an autobiography went from 1878 to 1882. And then for reasons that I don't know, he dropped the project. While he was in Arizona, which is just down in Cochise County, just north of the Mexican border, along where I-10 runs these days, and where the old Butterfield stage ran, and later on the Southern Pacific ran a line. There in the middle 1880s, he began writing yet another autobiography, this one of 300 pages, and he actually tried to have it published. He said that he wrote it for the young and rising generation, so that they would have some perception about what life was like through his kind. And prominent and preeminent in all of that was his conversion and then total immersion into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, something that was important and significant to him to the end of his day. In fact, in his last days, he was calculating a way to return to the temple and do more ordinance work for his family. It was crucial to him, and I might just divert here. This notion of family was such a big deal to him that as his family began to leave, simply to leave his immediate living, to move to other places because of economic hardships, it pained him greatly. And we have not only do we have his autobiographies, but we have correspondence, two sets of letter books wherein he copied down all of the letters that he wrote and the letters that were sent to him, wherein are illustrated his repeated attempts to try to get his family to return to him. There's a very interesting story. When he was in Sevier County in the spring of 1874, President Brigham Young, after leaving Washington County, St. George, began to organize United Orders as he moved north through the territory. And one of those United Orders was organized in Sevier County, and then the individual communities also had United Orders. And he was a part of that, indeed became one of the board of directors in the Monroe United Order. Quite a remarkable story in and of itself, because we actually have the Monroe United Order records in the church archives. And what a portrait it portrays. These people were almost without exception very poor. And the United Order didn't do much to alter that, to the point that Louis Barney applied to the president of the church at the time if he could leave the ecclesiastical United Order and organize his own family United Order. And he received approval for it. That was something that was not unlike what some others had done. I'm thinking in particular of the Johnson family, who did something of a similar sort. So as he progressed, and they didn't do really well in that either, but it was always on his mind to build what I've termed a family kingdom, to have his children close around him, where on impulse he could go and visit his children and his grandchildren. He could have them close. It was a major part of his life, and the written evidence of it is everywhere. And that has been a light to me. It has helped shape my thinking about the way that I want to spend the rest of my life. So he's speaking from the grave, speaking from the dust to those who've come after him.
How was his family like other families at the time?
Well, immediately coming to mind was the fact that he had two families. When Louis Barney became a Latter-day Saint, one of the most important individuals to him, to his conversion, was a man by the name of Alva Tippets. Alva Tippett was he's part of one of these family where he had brothers, Joseph and John, who became Latter-day Saints, raised their families. They were influential players in influential yet mostly unknown during the 1830s. In the 1840s, they lived in Nauvoo and had the same experiences as others. And then as they were driven out of Nauvoo, they got to the Missouri River there at winter quarters and in Canesville. And Alva Tippett had a young son who became very ill. We're familiar with the cemetery there that's near Florence, Nebraska, where are buried so many people because of the illness there. And Alva Tippett lost, first of all, a namesake son, Alva Tippett, and then he himself died, leaving two wives, one of them named Elizabeth and another named Caroline. And not unlike the biblical precedent where a brother would marry and raise the family of a deceased sibling because of them needing to be cared for, Lewis Barney who had already been married one of Alva Tippett's wives, and his half-brother, Benjamin Franklin Barney, married the other one. And so Lewis Barney, and interestingly, this wife, whose name was Elizabeth Beard, this wife had a child from Alva Tippett already, and then she became a mother with Lewis Barney as her husband to a number of other children. And her name, interestingly, was the same name as his first wife. So one went by, they're both of them named Elizabeth. One went by Betsy, the first wife, and then Elizabeth, who was 20 years younger than both Lewis and his first wife. He tried to keep the family together, but by the time they came of age themselves, they began to leave and became subject to mission calls. His oldest son, Walter Turner Barney, ended up down in the Mount Graham area of Arizona, subject to a call for Latter-day Saint settlement there. Others lived in the hardscrabble environment of Emery County and the Sevier Valley. It was not an easy life, but Lewis tried to pull that family together, tried to give them encouragement regarding the religion, tried to help them to make lives of their own wherein they could feel not only good about what they were doing for themselves and their families, but also the contribution that they could make to the kingdom, which kind of underscored everything that they did.
More and more it sounds like his life mirrored so many members of the church at the time, just trying to do their best.
Exactly. And most of them will remain unknown. Years ago, I stumbled across an expression by a Latter-day Saint historian who, in fact, he became one of the most famous historians. He eventually kind of peeled away from the church, but Del Morgan once made this statement, "Who shall say whether the 1,000 experiences in silence do not more nearly represent the full scope of the human experience than that fiercely highlighted life that survives as history?" And I think that's right. I think if we gauge our culture, our civilization, our heritage based just on individuals who have high profiles, it is actually going to distort the past. Having an understanding of how these more obscure individuals who lived, as Del Morgan suggests, no less inventive and creative and lives characterized by hardship and advance and disappointment, if we exclude those from our understanding of what Latter-day Saints were, we will certainly miss out on the major body of Latter-day Saints, again preoccupied with those who are most familiar and really most easily accessible.
As a reminder, we're talking with Ron Barney today on Legacy on the Mormon Channel. Ron, you cite Leonard Arrington's use of first, middle, and last wagon pioneers. Is pretty much what we were just talking about. Do you know where this designation of early Mormon society kind of originated?
Oh, I think it's generations old. I'm reminded of the sermon that President J. Reuben Clark Jr. gave, wherein he represents to a degree the spirit of what we've been talking about. The title of that sermon was "To Them of the Last Wagon," suggesting that there were those who were not up front, who trailed, who Leonard Arrington would characterize as the last wagon people, and that might constitute most of them. They, interestingly, those whose lives are known are those who wrote about themselves. And it's true today, too. If you do not write about yourself in some way, you will most assuredly be forgotten. Your kids might remember you, your grandchildren might remember you. But beyond that, the chance of your name or your life surviving becomes almost nil. In the church, we have what we call the first death, which is mortal physical death, and we call the second death spiritual death, wherein we are cut off from the presence of God. And I've kind of come up with what I call the third death. And the third death is when we don't write about ourselves and we actually obliterate our name from the human record. We do not speak from the grave. We have no influence over those who come after us, especially our children, our children's children, and so forth. I know the power of what writing can do to survive the ages, and the impact of individuals who go to the trouble of writing about themselves. The full scope of what they do is probably huge. It's real easy not to write about oneself because we in the lower ranks say, what have I got to say that anybody else would be interested in? What these luminaries, these high-profile people who live these interesting lives, and they might be wealthy, and they might have their names etched on buildings and huge monuments and cemeteries. Let their lives be the lives that we know about. I don't think anything could be farther from the truth. I wouldn't want to say that, nor even imply that these fiercely highlighted lives, as Del Morgan calls them, are not representative of a sector of what our experience is. But by no means do they represent the full scope of it. That only comes from the rank and file. That only comes from people who have taken the trouble to write about themselves. President Kimball years ago pressed for us to keep journals of our lives. We've had others who have emphasized from time to time writing autobiographical sketches. I still think it's the exception to the rule. I still think that people don't do that kind of thing, though they might write while they're on their missions. The church history department has gone to some trouble to gather up many of these to ensure that they are not forgotten. The new church history library that we have was designed to accommodate the inclusion of a continual stream of these records for the next generation. And to think that we don't have something to say just because we are not prominent, and our obituary may only fill a quarter of a column in a newspaper is simply faulty thinking. We have things to say. We've experienced things. We've overcome things that people need to know about. And while I receive inspiration from high-profile people, I am equally moved by individuals who have taken the trouble to write about themselves. I don't think there's anything that engages me more than reading biography or autobiography. There's no equivalent of it. I think in the introduction to my book, I make the point that if just one life probably is not the equal of a narrative about a circumstance, but when you have multiple people writing about a circumstance, it's much better than a narrative composite about what is going on. We need more personal writings. We need more diarists. We need more people to keep their correspondence. I scratch my head at what the world of email will do for the future. What so much of what we experience is evaporating into cyberspace. I see warnings on emails that say, save the forests, only do this electronically, don't print this out. And I wince because now there's a lot of it that is not worthy of being kept. And indeed, even in the church archives, we end up only keeping a little over 5% of the material that's produced by the church that has the enduring historical value. But to make up our minds about what's worthy of consideration and judging this stuff for others by saying what I have to say doesn't matter, and who's going to give a hoot about it in the future is just limited thinking.
It's obvious that your great-great-grandfather's memoirs has deeply affected you. Are there any other family records or family members that you're going to pursue similar to Lewis?
There is. In fact, I'm a work on progress on an ancestor of mine by the name of Joseph Taylor, who was an obscure figure who ended up in Weber County, but his experience crossed and intersected with so many people that he has a most interesting story. I also identified what I think is one of the most interesting diaries that was written for that Mormon trek in 1847. Indeed, Lewis Barney was part of his particular 10 that came with Brigham Young's initial vanguard group in 1847. And this man, whose name is Norton Jacob, left a wonderful diary. In fact, there's things in his diary that none of the other diarists write about, including some sermons wherein Brigham Young said some things that we don't have this information anywhere else but in Norton Jacob's diary. So a number of years ago, I edited his diary and annotated it, but I wanted to present a posture of the vanguard experience from one of the rank and file. And not very many people know anything about Norton Jacob, but it is a terrific diary and full of insight regarding the westward migration. In March of this year, I published a biography of a common man, a common wonderful man, by the name of W. Mack Watkins, who is still alive, but he represents, again, this sector of Latter-day Saints who get the job done, who take direction from the leaders and then make a life of their own. They have to wend their own way in the world and also couple that with their belief in the restored gospel and their devotion to expand the kingdom. And his life was one of those lives, but again, underrepresented, mostly unknown, but certainly worthy of telling.
So Louis Barney is definitely a family member of yours. What can the rest of us take from his life?
Well, I once spoke down at BYU at a conference, and a distant relative came up to me, and whom I'd never met before, introduced himself and said, I want you to know that the book that you wrote about our ancestor helped shape my life. I said, how so? He said, well, a few years ago, he said, I began to be worried about the world. And he said, I admit that I was driven by fear. And he said, I went to some trouble to obtain food storage and built sort of a bunker in my home so that I could ensure the survival of my family should anything awful happen. And he said, and to further ensure this, he said, I purchased some guns so I could protect this in case we were attacked or someone tried to get our stuff that I had so carefully obtained. He says, and then I read the story that you wrote about our ancestor Louis Barney when, in the middle 1850s, after a horrific grasshopper infestation when no seagulls came, that he had some barley left, and just barely enough to feed his family. And he parceled that barley out to his neighbors who had nothing. And he said, it touched my heart. He said, I totally changed my thinking about how what I was doing to protect my family would end up limiting me by my selfishness, and how my expanded view of my obligations to my fellow neighbors was elevated because of something that my great-great-grandfather did over 150 years ago. And I think that's the kind of thing that people today can glean from our ancestors. Again, I think that the major difference is technology and maybe the scope of life. But human interactions, human relationships, they haven't changed. We've still got to be our brother's keeper. The second great commandment still applies today. It may apply more so. And I think those who have gone before us, who have written about what they have done, can have a great impact on the success of our lives in negotiating life in this modern world.
Thank you very much, Ron, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.